Okay, have a look at this website. This is written by a former employee of English Heritage. They're the people that run Stonehenge. Now, when this guy was working for English Heritage at Stonehenge, he found a post hole, a Mesolithic post hole in the car park. Now, when he mentioned this to a superior, the implication was that if he does talk about this outside of the workspace, he'd no longer have a job.
And some of those photos, they just don't look right. They look like they're set up.
Our beloved Stonehenge, mountains of academic papers and a real scientific understanding about every aspect.
An archaeologist couldn't understand.
Yeah, Shakespeare for sure would have mentioned it.
But is this really the case? Because there often seems to be question marks over this, the rebuilding and the reconstruction of monuments like this.
Something wrong with these photos.
So are we being lied to about this, about a number of other things? Because there's a heck of a lot out there that certainly implies we are. And if you think that is odd, wait until you see this at West Kennet, Longbarrow. Here, and we can immerse ourselves in this structure, which is over 5,000 years old. We can learn about it, we can experience it, we can feel it. But this isn't necessarily how it looked originally. In fact, Stuart Piggott and a team in 1956 reconstructed this place, and their goal was not to conserve it as it was prior to the excavation. Instead, to reconstruct it as it may have looked in the Neolithic, and in fact, they even used some stones imported from nearby in the landscape. And well, it even states here, it is unclear if any attempt was made to place the stones in their original position. Is this in fact just someone's guess as to what things look like? How can we really trust what we're seeing today? And what about Stonehenge there on the horizon? What if I told you that that was 10,000 years old, over 4,500 years older than what we've been led to believe? Okay, there's a heck of a lot going on here. There's quite a bit to unpack. We've got three things essentially. We've got the 10,000-year-old Stonehenge claim. We've got the post hole cover up at Stonehenge as well. We've got some shifty goings on at West Kennet, Longbarrow. I'm going to start with the 10,000-year-old claim of Stonehenge, largely because the implication is we've got some science in the form of carbon dating to back this up. Okay, let's give this some geographical context, but first a quick bit of a side quest. If you fancy visiting Stonehenge, you don't fancy paying £34.50 per adult, well, I'll give you a bit of a life hack right now. You can actually stand within 20 or 30 yards of the stones using a footpath or open access bit of land. I'll take you there right now as we try and find the old car park when they moved it and modernised the whole thing. Quite important for today's story. Stonehenge Visitor Centre is much changed. In fact, the car park used to be here. Now, just here back in 1966, in this spot, 3 post holes were found. And those post holes were carbon dated 8,500 BCE to 7,600 BCE or thereabouts. That's 10,000 years ago. Carbon dated using scientific analysis. And here's the thing, that's 5,000 or so years older than what we believe Stonehenge to be. Now that of course proves nothing directly about the age of Stonehenge, however this is where things get interesting. Now Stonehenge has 3 different known sources for the stones. The blue stones from the Rhos-y-felin mountains in South Wales, that inner ring of slightly smaller stones, the big megaliths 15 or so miles north of here from the West Woods, and finally the altar stone in the middle. Well, this came all the way down from somewhere in the Orcadian Basin, but not the Orkney Islands. Yep, that is in northern Scotland. Okay, so I'm in the very wet old Stonehenge car park. I remember seeing the dots years ago when we parked in this car park, marking the site of the Mesolithic post holes. Come back to that very shortly. Now this article in question, well, it uses the blue stones to assert the date of Stonehenge being 10,000 years older than what we now believe. Now the author Robert Langdon suggests that these post holes date from around 8,000 BCE, these 4 here behind me. And it's correct because we do have that carbon date. Then goes on to suggest, well, that there is some activity over in the Rhos-y-felin mountains, the quarry where those bluestones came from, and the activity dates also to 8,000 BCE. Well, that's really compelling, right? That really makes me want to dig a lot deeper. So the question is that actually true? Well, it turns out it is. The paper, the original academic paper by that these facts are taken from, published in Antiquity magazine, shows that this site was indeed occupied very early in the Mesolithic, 10,000 years ago. We do indeed have halves here. Now, is that truly evidence that this stone circle and the setting is actually 10,000 years old? No, and maybe if you think that, give your head a bit of a wobble, because when we look at the actual academic paper done on that site, well, it does indeed tell us that there is early Mesolithic activity there 10,000 years ago, and that in itself is great. But there's also a few other things within that article we don't just want to gloss over. Number one, well, within those Mesolithic layers, 8 dates range between 8,550 BCE and 7790 BCE, and they state there was no evidence whatsoever of any quarrying activity on that site within that layer. Number two, well, above that Mesolithic layer we see a Neolithic layer, and they take a number of dates: 3620, 3360 BCE and 3500 to 3120 BCE. Number three, and importantly here, the earliest quarrying linked to Stonehenge bluestones is probably Neolithic 3500 to 3100 BC, based on the hazelnut shells from the outcrop layer directly associated with the recess where a pillar was removed. We do have 6,000 years of activity at that Preseli quarry, and that's fascinating in itself. We start from the Mesolithic and then into the Neolithic, well then they start quarrying, not before the Neolithic. And we know that simply because of the layers and what they tell us. There is no cover-up here. In fact, there is a bigger mystery. If they were indeed quarried, as science and archaeology tells us, in that period between 3500 and 3100 BCE, well, that's over 500 years before they were placed in the ground in their final resting place here at Stonehenge. So what exactly is going on there? I don't think anyone really knows, and there, right there, that's your mystery. Okay, so let's get back to West Kennet Longbarrow, where on the face of it, well, it seems like somebody's just thrown those stones back together how they think they should go, and made no attempt to actually rebuild it in the way that it would have looked like for us to see. What exactly is going on there? Now here's the thing. This West Kennet Longbarrow was rebuilt in the 1950s, soon after an excavation. Now, a recent watching brief by Cotswold Archaeology seems to point out a few issues, including one which I shall read you. It is clear that the original excavators were not entirely happy with the final reconstruction. So this was reconstructed almost at the same time as that of the reconstruction in part of Stonehenge back in 1958. In fact, it was by the same people. Are we seeing the same thing there as we see here? People just reconstructing things as they think they should be or should have been. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit further, because on the face of it, well, it feels like we can't really trust the people that we enlist to teach us about these places. Can that really be the case? Okay, so firstly let's have a look at the report by Stuart Pigott, published in 1958. Now by page 237 we start to see some signs of the issues they faced. Whether these uprights had carried a lintel could not be decided owing to the destruction. A little further on in that report, well, Pigott goes on to suggest that not only are there no abnormalities here, the floor layout is exactly as he's experienced and seen before, but also this is one of the largest and finest examples of a 7 Cotswold type chambered cairn that he's ever seen. So with that, we now have evidence that Pigott clearly can see a good floor plan. He can also see, at the very least, the significant uprights of the main entrance of the chamber. Now there is one other paragraph which has been taken the wrong way on a number of occasions, and apart from these and other results of concern to the professional archaeologists, the work of conservation and judicious restoration which the Ancient Monuments Department carried out. Now some have taken this as criticism from Stuart Pigott towards the work of the Ministry of Works in repairing it, and I think really actually that's not the case. I think Cotswold Archaeology in their writing, in their brief, well, they're just being scientific rather than critical. Pigott came here with this excavation with decades of experience on what these look like, and that was confirmed by that floor plan, the layout, the great example that this was of a chambered cairn. And of course then the Ministry of Works, the archaeological department, came along and put this back as to they believed it should look like. And again, probably based on Pigot's experience, to put this back as it was immediately prior to that excavation would be completely meaningless, because it was just a pile of rocks strewn in random positions. But to put this back as they thought it should like, I believe was the right thing. And here's the thing, let's say there were some errors when this was put back together in the 1950s, because there were some aspects of archaeology they didn't understand. Who cares? Because that there, as it is now, has inspired me to seek out more, and I hope it's inspired thousands of other people in the same way too. And maybe those people will go back to their communities and perhaps seek out places like this and care for them. That's what this is about for me. So that leaves us with just one issue, the case of the member of staff at Stonehenge that was silenced about their post hole find. Now firstly, I should make it clear that I do know this person that used to work at English Heritage. Now I won't mention his name, but I'll happily share the blog which he writes, where you can find this information and have a deeper dive yourself. Now I have been messaging him in this last week or so, and he's been happy to talk about what happened back in 2016. So back at the Stonehenge car park where we were just earlier, you will have noted as we discussed those post holes, and those post holes were discovered in 1966 by an archaeological dig. Great stuff, and they've been marked on their spots ever since to give us context, and we can look at thereafter. Now they dated those using carbon dating to around 8000 BCE, give or take. Now in 2016 some re-landscaping needed to take place within that car park, and a drainage trench I believe was dug north of the post holes, south of the fence, so away from those post holes, cutting across in a big line. Okay, so let's get things right. I'll quote that member of staff right here. I noticed that the trench had cut through a soil anomaly that to my untrained eye looked very much like another post hole. Despite asking, no excavation report was forthcoming. So this chap had found a fourth post hole, absolutely staggering. So he reported this to his superiors. Look what I've found. Now he was almost immediately reminded of his non-disclosure working agreement. I'll leave you to decide if that was them telling him to be quiet. Now this all sounds like a very shady cover-up, and in fact people have used this to their own gain and suggested indeed that he resigned based on those words and that decision and that find and this cover-up, when that simply wasn't the case. He resigned much later. So if there wasn't a huge cover-up here to keep hidden the secrets of Stonehenge that they don't want you to know about, what exactly was going on here? I've got a funny feeling the answer is probably a very simple one. Okay, so my interpretation here is, if there is indeed a cover-up, well, it's more of a cover-up of one person's incompetence to organise archaeologists to oversee the digging of a trench, rather than a cover-up of an entire organisation to keep secret one fresh post hole we've found, when we've already found 3 others in the same line, so it's probably contemporary with those. Fascinating though that find was, cover-up it is not. Okay, so here's where this relates to you. I want you to picture your workplace, wherever that be. I want to picture what you do for a living. Now imagine if somebody were to turn up and do a quick half an hour sort of read up of what you do, what your business does, all the intricacies of your job, and then took away what they wanted to take away to fit a narrative. They didn't really do as much of a deep dive as they could. They didn't spend months doing what you do, learning, training courses. I think that's what we see today, and we see it a lot in society today, where we just pick very small snippets of information and we run with a big conspiracy. Well, the answer to the question, are we being lied to? Well, unequivocally it is a no. Imagine the work involved from organisations such as English Heritage to cover something up where every staff member, every contractor ever employed by them would need to hold secrets for the rest of their lives. And we certainly don't talk about those post holes that much, and perhaps that's why we lead ourselves into conspiracies about them for some strange reason, because we've learned everything we can about them. We've got a carbon date, we know when they were sunk into the ground. Science will change that one day, archaeology will change that one day, and we will know more. But until that point, we have plenty of mysteries, as I always say. And if you like mysteries and you like prehistoric mysteries, we've got a playlist just there, go watch.